Hello students, welcome to Notebook. In this session, we shall be discussing the meaning, importance and types of freedom. Understand the dimensions of freedom and understand Harm's principle. Freedom would be attributed to a person or a group of people who are able to pursue their interests and ambitions, which are important for their development without any constraints. Ideal of freedom is different for each individual. Let us see two examples as mentioned in your books. Nelson Mandela in his book Long Walk to Freedom describes the atrocities and brutalities against black race fighting for freedom from oppression by superior white people. These included being bundled into townships and denied easy movement within the country. It also describes how a person was denied a free choice of whom to marry. For his black race of people, Nelson Mandela spent 20 years of his life in jail. He gave up his personal life for freedom. Similarly, let's take the example of Aung San Suu Kyi of Myanmar. She, in her book, Freedom from Fear, described her non-violent struggle for her people for democracy and basic human rights. She had been in house arrest, separated from her children by urban militia controlling government. In her view, freedom is a dignified human life based on citizens' ability to overcome fear. These two examples describes the ideal of both individuals, being the center for their struggle of independence. This ideal was the center of India's national struggle and of the people of Asia and Africa against British, French and Portuguese colonialism. Swaraj, or rule of the self, and rule over self in Indian context meant freedom in constitutional and political demand, and as a value at a socio-collective level. This was word used by Father of the Nation, Gandhiji, where he described liberation of an individual and collective potentialities guided by principle of justice as independence and freedom. Let us now understand what is freedom, what is constraints, and if constraints are required. Freedom means the absence of external constraint on individual and the opportunity to develop their talent and capabilities freely. However, it is indeed necessary to determine which social constraints are necessary and important. An example is driving on the road. You can drive your vehicle through the road, but there are speed limits defined for each road to avoid accidents. This indicates the relation between individual and society, with constraints that can be removed and those that remain. Freedom is not only important for development of capabilities, but it also provides the exercise of one's powers of reason and judgment. Both aspects, absence of external constraints and existence of conditions or constraints, are important for freedom. Let us now understand the sources of constraints. Constraints on freedom for individuals from society could come from inequality of society. Example, caste system, or could be by domination by external forces. In this, the reason towards freedom and existence of constraint was given by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose when he said that freedom means for individual as well as for society, for rich and poor, man and woman, individuals and classes, resulting in liberation from political bondage, distribution of wealth, ending caste barriers and social inequities, communalism, and religious intolerance. Need for constraints. Constraints on people are important so that they can sustain in society. Their views, speech, and expression which is possible when willingness to respect differences of views, opinions, and beliefs exists. These differences are argued and debated without any coercion. Though some groups might get weaker, and here law could sustain their views, political and ideological differences are important for the community to get into collective decision-making, and therefore some constraints are relevant. Rejecting views, unacceptable views, could be discussed and debated. It is important to find necessary and relevant constraints. Liberalism involves the value of tolerance. Liberals support rights of person to hold views even in disagreements. They emphasize that families and societies have no value by themselves. It is the individual who are important. Individual liberty is prior to equality. Modern liberalism supports welfare state and accepts the need for measures to reduce social and economic inequalities, emphasizing on free market. How do we now define which external constraints are justifiable and which are not? Harm's principle. John Stuart Mill, in his essay on liberty, describes a political theory, the harm principle. He has distinguished between self-regarding actions that have consequences for the individual actor and other regarding actions which have consequences for others. For first type of consequences, state need not interfere. For second type, there is a case for external interference. Harm from person's activity must be serious to be constrained, because freedom is crucial for a dignified human life. For minor harm, there is social disapproval, and tolerance towards different interests and views must be sustained. This holding of views need not extend to actions putting others in danger. In India, these are called reasonable restrictions. That is, restrictions be reasonable and not excessive. Dress code or type of dress taken up by people is a freedom of their preference for type of clothing in a situation, place, etc. For example, a test match in cricket requires every cricketer to wear white dress. Students are required to wear school uniforms. A fatwa issued for certain dresses by clerics. Choice of dress is a freedom of expression. Are restrictions justified in all cases or only in some? When does it constitute a constraint on freedom? Also, who has the authority to impose these constraints? Some of these questions are important to ascertain reasonable restrictions. Now we'll speak about a complicated concept of freedom, which is important for you to know is negative and positive liberty. Negative liberty is when individual can defend an area in which he would be inviolable. This is a minimum area which is sacred and not to be interfered with. It is a recognition of human nature and human dignity that needs an area where the person can act unobstructed by others. It is the idea of freedom from. Positive liberty is about human beings being free in society and not outside it. It is concerned with conditions and nature of relations between human and society such that there are fewer constraints. This is the idea of freedom too. In many cases, you have heard certain films or books have been banned. We'll now understand another delicate idea: freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is an important idea of the minimum area of non-interference. Within the ideal of freedom, it must be protected from people in society who would infringe upon it or disturb the delicate nature. Famous French philosopher Voltaire had made a famous statement: I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to death your right to say it. Well, friends, hope you have had an interesting learning session. See you in our other videos. Till then, happy learning.